Yep, good.
It is a documentary.
Moshe, Baron.
I'm Yolanda Avram, that's Abraham in Greek, and my last name is Willis, but that's my married name.
Sam Weinreb.
I am Jewish, yes.
I'm a Jew.
I'm sorry to say that I'm an atheist.
I was born 10/20/1923. At that time it was Czechoslovakia.
Born in a small shtetl in Poland by the name of Lamazi, which is in eastern Poland.
I lived in Lodz, Poland. I am 93.
August 6th, 1930, in Paris.
I was born in Debrecen, Hungary, 1938, February the 5th.
96. I finished 96 in December 13.
I'm 89 years old.
I had a wonderful childhood, and even though we were Jewish, we spoke Polish. My parents were secular Jews, not religious Jews. And I went to Polish school, and I graduated in 1937. And then I went to Krakow to a university to study, but my but I couldn't continue studying because on September 1939 the Germans invaded Poland, and it changed my life.
It's a very long story. I'm trying to make it short.
World War started in September 1, 1939. The Germans attacked Poland from the west, and they stopped in the middle. There was a river Bug, and there was a reason for it, because they had a non-aggression agreement with the Soviet Union. Officially. Secretly, they had an agreement to divide Poland. So this is why they stopped there where they stopped. 17 days later, the Soviets invaded the part of Poland where I was born. And about 18 months later, in June 1941, the Germans attacked the Soviet Union, and within a few days they were in my little town.
Well, I have a story that I put down on paper in the interest of time, and my story starts in 1944 when the Germans invaded Hungary. And as soon as they invaded Hungary, Eichmann came into Hungary with the Gestapo, and they started to round up the Jews. In Debrecen, there were several thousand Jews there, and we lived in a Jewish neighborhood, and they came noontime. They knew that everybody is at home at that time for lunch, which in Europe was actually the main meal of the day. and they started using megaphones to ask us to leave our homes and take with us our valuables only and a change of underwear. They were taking us to a better place. They gave us 15 minutes, and we all assembled outside, and soon they started to drive us to the railway. It took several hours to get to the railway, and they were already rushing and shoving and pushing people. And if these people could not go fast enough, whether they were sick or old, they beat them with clubs.
When the war started in 1939, we escaped into the forest. My father was in the Polish army. He came back to our house and he says, we better get out of here. And we tried to go into, escape towards Russia. However, we couldn't get into Russia because there was the treaty between the Russians and the Germans, and the Russians wouldn't let us in. So we wound up in the forest, and there was myself, mother, father, had a uncle and a cousin. So we spent 2 years in the forest before we were able to cross them into Russia, across the border into Russia.
Well, I was one of the lucky ones. I was a hidden child, and you know the very famous hidden child, Anne Frank. Mm-hmm. But I was not hidden in an attic or a bunker. We were hiding in plain sight, passing as Christians. My entire family used the same trick, whether we were with each other or like there came a time when things got so dangerous, my parents decided to give my brother and myself to different Christian families, so that they kept getting recognized, and they were afraid that we would be caught with them, and then we would be lost. Now, of course, nobody knew at that time exactly what happened to the children when they went to Poland or any of that, but they didn't suspect that it would be great, so.
On December 17, 1939, the Soviet Union, the Red Army, came to us to Vilnius. There we lived for 2 years or so. After that, on June 22nd, 1941, the Germans came and they took over. In the first 5 weeks, we lived only among the Poles and the Lithuanians. Then after 5 weeks they came, they told us to go to a specific location in the market, take whatever we can. Then we had to walk 21 kilometers to a specific location where the ghettos, 6 of them. And then we were there in the ghettos. Finally I decided somehow, maybe because I was starting to work so young, and I don't know myself what it is, and then I ran away.
I had been under that march. I have the original map what they use in a Nuremberg trial.
I was in Lodz ghetto from 1940 till 44. My mother died in ghetto. I was then in Auschwitz when they closed ghetto. We were shipped to Auschwitz. was only 5 days in Auschwitz. And then there was a selection, and from Auschwitz I was sent with my sister to Stutthof. Stutthof was located in northern Poland, not far away from the Baltic Sea. And she died from typhus, because the typhus epidemic killed almost everybody here.
I was in the army, Polish army, and 2.5 years. And then I was relieved from the army, and I was at home for a year. Then I was mobilized till the war broke out for Germany. So I went to the war, and then I was in prison camp. I was a POW. Yeah. And then they released all the Jews from the camp, released them home. From there, they couldn't take them to the concentration camp as a POW.
Yeah.
So they made out of you a civilian, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and I lived in larger ghetto, you know, till 1945, Paul. And when I came home, my father and mother was there. My sisters were already going. Then my father passed away, and I was with my mother. When they liquidated the ghetto, they took us to Auschwitz. So my mother went left and I went right. You know how it was.
We had a hardware store that we managed, and of course I attended Czech school, and only till high school. They did not have a high school at that time. And I studied some of it in Ungvar, which is the capital of Carpathian. That's the part of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia is made of 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. And Bohemia, Moravia, Slovakia, Carpathian. Okay. And we were at what you call the tail end of Czechoslovakia. And until 1938-39, when Germany started putting their weight around, and Czechoslovakia was sacrificed by the British. So when Czechoslovakia fell apart, and we went back to the old Austria-Hungarian. So we became Hunkies at that time. And until 1944, and whatever, we were all, most of it at home, but the youngsters that had to go into the army went in there, but mostly the Jewish boys wound up in labor camps, not going in a uniform. They were just working behind the lines. Until 1944, when Germany marched in, took over the government in Budapest, and set up their own government, in other words, their own hanger-ons, Nazi parties there in Hungary. They called them the Nilos, N-I-Y-L-O-S. That was the name of the party. And just like we had the SS in Germany, and this was the gangsters running the country. And in 1944, when finally the order came that, of course, Germany marched in and took it over. 1944, the order was given that we are to pack up and to report to the ghetto. And we spent some time there. There's a lot of stories behind all of that.
What was it in... one of my sisters was married to an Hungarian, and her husband was made a prisoner of war. And my mother sent me to the country with her for a while because she had a baby who was sick. So I stayed with her in a certain place in France, which called Le Morvan, and I went to school there a little bit. I'm not going to go into the detail, it's in the story. But eventually, they came to arrest her. And she was lucky because before they really transferred her to the Germans in another town, there was a man, Monsieur Moreau, who worked, who lived in that place, Jeusot, G-E-U-S-O-T, and he worked a little bit for the resistance. And he gave a few phone calls, and they released her, and right away we packed and we went back to Paris. There was let's see, my brother-in-law who was in Germany as a prisoner of war. There were, I think, about 5 brothers, and they had this small factory of raincoats. And since things were very alarming, the head of the family decided to put a French Jewish director, Mr. Maurice Blum, at the head of his business. Because at the time they were not taking the French Jews to be deported. They started mostly with the Germans, the Polish people, and all the other people who emigrated to France from Vienna, from every place for the war. So Monsieur Maurice Blum, when he took care of the family affairs, and his wife was not Jewish. She had been raised in a convent, trying to think of her name, Aimée Blum, A-I-M-E-M-E. And they had a daughter, and they did well, they had a maid. And she took me to Normandy to live by train, to live with an older French Catholic couple, Monsieur and Madame Barbier, B-A-R, B-I-E-R. They were a very nice older couple living in a very nice house. They had their own garden, they had sheep, they had apples, what do you call, I forget the name. Apples, fields, and they made their own cider. And they made cider for the other people too, who brought their apples. So in order to be safe, they sent me to school, and they sent me to church every Sunday.
I came home from a bar mitzvah lesson, and our home was locked and no one there. Our next door neighbor, who was not Jewish, took me into his home and told me that my parents, 2 brothers and sister, who was only 6 years old at that time, along with quite a few other people, were picked up and taken away. That afternoon was the last time I ever saw my whole family.
All the way with this experience, I had the courage that I had the feeling I will survive. And I did, and I did.
Well, this neighbor who helped me came over to me, saw me out there, and evidently my father or mother must have talked to that neighbor and asked him to watch for me when I get home and asked him to help me. But the neighbor said it would not be safe for me to remain in that country and that I must leave immediately, otherwise I will also wind up where all the others are.
Auschwitz, Birkenau.
World War started in September 1, 1939. The Germans attacked Poland from the west, and they stopped. In the middle there was a river Bug, and there was a reason for it, because they had a non-aggression agreement with the Soviet Union. Officially. Secretly they had an agreement to divide Poland. So this is why they stopped there where they stopped. 17 days later, the Soviets invaded the part of Poland where I was born. And about 18 months later, in June 1941, the Germans attacked the Soviet Union, and within a few days they were in my little town.
Now, where were you fighting with the partisans? In what parts of? That was in Poland, correct?
It was Belarus already. Poland didn't exist anymore.
Right.
Formerly Poland, formerly.
Okay.
Now it was Belarus.
And about how long did you spend in the forest?
About 18 months.
Can you tell us one of the, I don't know if you would call it a mission or some kind of event that you took part in, you know, something against the Germans while you were with the partisans?
First, I want to tell you something which is not part of the resistance, but the resistance helped me save part of my family. By joining them, I got connections to enter the ghetto and brought out my brother and sister one time. That had some weapons that were stolen from the Germans and had it hidden in the ghetto. So this farmer brought out the weapons. And the third time, it was March 17, 1943, my mother came out. 2 days later, the ghetto was destroyed. And that was my father and sister, including all my relatives, and about 6,000 or 7,000 other Jews. Now, as far as the partisans, I participated in many activities, like ambushes and attacks on small garrisons. For a while, I had a mission to retrieve parachuted weapons from the Russian army, which meant that myself and a few other people had to find a clearance in the forest and set up, they used to set up by radio signals where to drop it, so they would have fires, let's say, a triangle in format, whatever was arranged by radio. And after the drops, we would pick it up and bring it to the place where we were located, the camp, the partisan camp.
In order to be safe, they sent me to school and they sent me to church every Sunday. I went to school and of course I couldn't study for higher studies because the school system in France, by the age of 11, you must declare what you want to do. And since I didn't have my parents or anybody speaking for me, I was set to study up to the, what you call, certificat d'études élémentaires at the age of 14. But since the teacher and the directrice of the school, a very devoted Catholic woman, Mademoiselle Geneviève Pitois, she kept 2 Jewish girls in her home. And so I graduated at the age of 13 instead of 14.
Until Christmas. And Christmas, we started the marching and march until the government requested our work to dig
The trenches.
trench for the tank to fall in.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
camouflaged it,
Yeah.
as we saw. And when the very cold weather came in, they brought in Polish men and bombed the top of it.
Yeah. Okay.
And we still had to work. No gloves or...
Right.
She started to move towards the train, and my mother begged her not to go. We already knew, not us, children, not children, but my mother and the adults knew where we were going. But she said she can't take the crying of her children. She had 7 children. The oldest one and the father were taken immediately to a labor camp. But the young ones stayed with her, and the hunger already started. The food was not enough for a whole day. So the kids were crying all the time. She couldn't take it anymore, and she did get on the train. And we never saw him again.
I ran away and I started walking. I walked, and then some other people like me ran away, and then we were 4, then 8, then 12, and then we were a group, and it was already easier. It's never easy, but we had a better chance to survive or to get caught and get killed right away.
Right.
Yeah, because we had some revolvers. We could, and then there are nice people in this world. On the border, Poland and Germany, there were Spielmans. They were intellectual, educated people, professionals in music, and they had their children. So their children were coming out. They knew we were there to tell us when to come out and when not, when the Germans were there and when they weren't there.
And then from Auschwitz, they sent me to different camps. In the West, we went for a dead march, you know,
Yeah.
March of the Dead.
The camp was surrounded with barbed wire fences and soldiers on towers surrounding that camp. So escaping from Auschwitz rather, was just about impossible.
They ended up in a gas chamber because in that time Birkenau was where it located.
Yeah.
And on that first night, we didn't find peace because those barracks were not like sea lager, where
Right.
they had showers and banks. We slept on the floor like spoon put together.
Yeah.
And we didn't have the rest, and we expected when we will see them, when we will see, and whispering. And there was a Polish blocker tester. She was trusted by, she was responsible for us.
Yep.
And she could not stand us not to have peace. And she came out, she had a separate little room, and she came out and she said, listen folks, take a deep breath, and what do you smell are your relatives who you hope to see are burning out there. And then we told each other, this is sugar. We became quiet. Yes, yes.
The Gestapo was dressed all black, and he had the two lightnings on each side, and then he had a skull on his cap. And the Gestapo, they were chosen for their brutality.
I was in Lodz Ghetto from 1940 till 44. My mother died in ghetto. I was then in Auschwitz when they closed ghetto. We were shipped to Auschwitz. Was only 5 days in Auschwitz. And then there was a selection, and from Auschwitz I was sent with my sister to Stutthof. Stutthof was located in northern Poland, not far away from the Baltic Sea. And she died from typhus. Because the typhus epidemic killed almost everybody here. My father, we were separated in Auschwitz, and he was sent to concentration camp. Somebody told me the name, but I don't remember, and he died in concentration camp, yeah. So did most of my family, yeah. My mother had 8 siblings. She was one of 8 siblings, my father one of 7 siblings, and only 2 brothers, my father's 2 brothers with their daughters survived, but otherwise everybody, you know, I lost everybody. Yeah.
I want you to know, after marching for a few days, of the 5,000 people that started this march, we may have had about 400 or so people who were still alive. Anyone who could not walk for whatever reason was shot and left behind. And I will tell you why so many people were shot and left behind. We were walking, it was very, very cold, icy roads, snow all over it. And most of the people that sat down simply could not get up. And if you couldn't get up, they wouldn't leave you. They had no intentions even to taking us to a different camp. That was never their intention. And that's why so many people died. But when I saw what was going on, it was still dark during the night, I decided that I will run out of that line and try to escape. I knew my chances of succeeding were very, very slim, but at that point it really didn't matter. In fact, at that point even I was no longer afraid to die. I knew I was going to die soon anyhow. So I did take a chance. Would you believe, to this day, I have no idea how far and how long I ran. The only thing I remember was waking up in a Russian military hospital where I was told that Russian troops had found me lying on the ground unconscious and took me to their hospital.
My experience was first being rescued by the people in Crete, a family in Crete, which took us. We were from the age of 2.5, my brother was 2.5, suffering from amoebic dysentery, and he cried all the time, which was very dangerous for the rest of the group. To a 79-year-old grandmother who was diabetic. And in between, my father was the only guy, the only man, and the women were urban ladies that didn't have even the appropriate attire for this kind of climbing, partly on foot, on goat paths to the mountain. Near the town, we had first taken refuge in Crete. We were hoping to go from Crete to Egypt as the royal family and the government had done. So my experience was one of rescue, essentially, of righteous people that took me in after the family dispersed to protect the children, as you know, my brother and myself.
So that's when the order came that we had to pack up. It was, I remember, the last day of Passover was on a Saturday. Sunday night, where the order was given us that we had to leave the houses, pack only what you could take with you, and by noon time you're supposed to report in the area. And then they put us in, and they took one of the streets and made it a ghetto.
Yep.
And we all had to move in, so every house that had a family living wound up with 2 or 3 families putting together. So that's what happened immediately. And then the order was given, we had to pick up our bundles. We were going to the train. And but before they got to the train, they took us through school buildings. And there they were ordered, pick out anything that you have in your pockets, open up your bundles, and they simply helped themselves to whatever they wished. Okay? So if you had any cash on you, that was the end of it. Or jewelry.
Yeah.
The girls had some jewelry, like earrings or a ring, all gone. And finally we loaded us up on the train. And through the night we arrived in the big city where they had a break and a lumberyard for us. And they marched us into there. No facilities of any kind. No cooking, no toilets, no nothing, okay? And it was still April. Yeah, it was end of March and April. It was still muddy, rainy season. And that was hell on earth. They insisted that everybody should tell them where the money is. They figured we all have somewhere hidden money somewhere. And a few of us got beaten up quite a bit. In one particular one, I know there was a young couple, and they had a little girl. She was about 7 or 8 years old, and the German called them in, and I mean we all lined up to observe is what's going on.
Okay.
And they started beating on him. They wanted to know what he did with the money, where it is. And he said, I have taken with me, and they already took it from us.
Yeah.
And they started beating me up, and his wife and the little girl was had to stand next by to it and watch how the father was beaten up bloody. So that's, I remember distinctly, the outside of whatever else happens.
Yeah.
In order to have fun with us, they picked up about a dozen or so elderly people, and they told them to get on your stomach and start crawling. So what was the idea? Of course, it was still muddy, water everywhere, with mud, and they directed them especially to drag themselves around with, in other words, to humiliate us, okay?
When we crossed the border into Russia, my father was taken into the Russian army, and the government actually put my mother and my sister. They put us on a train, and they sent us as far away as they could from the front. So they put us on a train going into Ural Mountains, which is near Siberia, and there were. By that time I remember there were the Luftwaffe, the German, the Air Force. They were bombing the rails, and they were trying to actually. I guess they were trying to kill us, more or less. So we had to get off and jump off and on the train in order to for the people to try to fix the rail and so forth.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing I can probably remember.
You see, dragging people one to the grave.
Yeah.
I was dragging the people to the grave.
Did you?
Yeah.
About my wife.
Yeah.
She was born in the Polish town of Częstochowa, which is at the western part of Poland, close to the German border. And when the German occupied the town, about a short time later, they began to force some of the Jewish population to do some forced labor somewhere, and father or brother once went to work and never came back. She was, by looking at her, she was physically able to work, and because they selected her among those who will be alive. Her mother was separated and died in I think in Majdanek, I'm not sure. And she spent in the same town about 3.5 years in this forced labor camp. Their work was cleaning the spent shells, artillery shells against airplanes, to prepare them for reuse. But something happened there which is was very rare in those camps. One night I hear the voice of a baby crying, and there were no babies supposed to be there. So then they watched the woman, one of the inmates, walking to the place where the baby was crying, picked up the baby and took it to wherever she was. It turned out that this woman's husband, I think, was a Jewish policeman in the ghetto, and he was able to smuggle in the baby into the barracks, And from there on, the baby became the object of making sure that he is not being discovered. So he would stay hidden all the time, particularly when the German supervisors would come in, almost 3.5 years. And sometime in 1944, they had a roll call every morning, and they were outside, all the women outside, and the commander of this camp reviewed them, counted them, whatever, and then he turned around, which he normally didn't do, and went back to the barracks, saying that I want to inspect the barracks, something which he never did before. And when he came out with David. The boy already was about 3.5, 4 years old, or 5 years old. And then something again which they surprised them is they said to David, would you like to take a ride with me on a bicycle? So, of course. So David got on the bicycle on the back, and they thought this would be the end of it. A while later, he came back with David and left him there. And they haven't seen the commander anymore because the Russian army was already approaching the town or the area. And about, I think, the same day, people came running to say, there's no guards anymore, the camp is open. And the Russians, they could hear the exchange of artillery or tanks. And the Russians arrived close to the city. So they were free, and they walked out. My wife was holding David's hand, and went to their city, which was partially destroyed. So she recalls she and two friends went into hide because there was still a battle going on. They went into a basement to hide, and she says for the first time they cried. It says in the camp itself, there was crying was sort of people didn't cry. People were despaired, but not cry. And now they realized that they're left alone. The families are gone. They had the opportunity to cry.
That here is the place where they finally gonna finish us, the bastards. And sure enough, we heard the rumbling of a tank. And when the tank came out, the turret was not aimed at us, not at the train. It was aimed to the side. The door of the turret opened, and a soldier came out, and he did not have the Nazi uniform. So my father, who was studying English already, knowing that we are going to America, he yelled Americans.
And I was there until liberation, which was an amazing, amazing day in Athens. The British liberated us with a sprinkling of Americans and French troops, and it was like just an unbelievable, joyous event in Athens. There were people that put their oriental carpets in the street for the jeeps of the liberators to ride over, you know, to just, and women who were so demure and very proper would just grab a hold of the soldiers and you know, hug them, and they, it was like an incredible, joyous occasion, just bedlam in the streets.
I tell you, not enough word to express that night when we knew that the guards are not there and the Americans are in with us.
Yeah.
Not a minute sleep. It was unbelievable. Yeah, May 8, just imagine the war was over and we'd still been suffering like that.
Yeah.
When we came back from Russia, back to Poland, we tried to, find our house, and we found out that, we saw that the house was destroyed, and the rest of the family that remained there, they were all massacred. I guess we were told that, like in 1942, the Germans plus the police and so forth, they took them out in the forest and they slaughtered them. They killed them all. So we didn't want to stay in Poland any longer.
Like sisters, uncles and cousins and nephews, nieces, yeah. Okay.
Yes, in einem Zeitung hier for the 6 million Jews. Gemalos, Gedoshim, Oteo.
I was born as Ruth Rinde, and now I go by Irene Skolnick. Soviet occupation until June 22nd, 1941, when Hitler broke his agreement with Stalin and attacked the Soviet Union. And within days, we came under Nazi occupation. See, and that's when life changed drastically. Herded into the ghetto, life got much more difficult and challenging. And sometimes in the spring of 1942 was when my mother came to the decision that surviving in the ghetto was not an option, and she wasn't going to stay and put up with the daily humiliations and uncertainty of life. She was going to obtain false papers and pass herself off as a Catholic. We call that, going Aryan, right? Pretending to be an Aryan. Successful in getting permission from the Germans to move into a vacant single-family home. It was a detached home on the outskirts of the city, quite close to the factory, actually, which was convenient from that point of view. It had a large kitchen and a large bedroom, a cellar and an attic, no electricity, no indoor plumbing. They got stopped by a Polish policeman who asked to see their papers, and her friend pulled out his German ID, and the policeman says, "Ha, and how much did that cost you?" And he quotes the exact price that a counterfeiter charges for fake ID. And so my mother understood she better not produce hers, which was identical, so she produced her Polish ID. And the policeman got angry at her, says, "What are you giving me this? The Germans have been here so long ago, what's your German ID?" And she says, "Well, I come from the East. They haven't been there that long, and they just didn't get around to giving all of us their ID." So he pocketed her ID and his ID and says, "Well, I think you better come with me. And her friend tried to argue. She said, "No, it's okay, come on, let's go, he's the authority." But after a while, she sort of asked, I said, "Actually, where are you taking us and why?" And he says, well, I'm taking you to the police station because I think you are Jewish. Whereupon my mother burst out laughing, and in an Academy-winning performance, exclaims, now that is a good joke. Wait till I get home and tell my friends the adventures that befell me when I visited the nation's capital. And she was so convincing that she threw the policeman off track. He started doubting himself. He gave them back their papers. So telling my mother, you're okay, but you look like a Bedouin, to her friend. And he let them go.
So what was the maximum amount of people that were there at one time that
12.
you can remember?
12.
And how many of those people had to remain hidden?
8. So the Germans answered, oh, police! Yeah. Well, give time my uncle to get into the attic. No time to pull up the ladder. Just closes the trap door. Since my mother had already opened the door, he didn't dare to do whatever that closing mechanism he had. He just stood on that trap door. When the Germans came, they searched, they looked, went to the cellar, everywhere, and then they asked him what's upstairs. And my mother, cool as can be, said, I don't know. When we moved in, this was closed, this was locked, we couldn't open it, and since we don't need the space, we didn't bother forcing it. And one of the Germans climbed up the ladder, tried to push it open, with my uncle standing on it. Of course, it resisted. He let go. So, you know, I mean, there were just a multitude of situations where it was do or die. You have to keep your cool, think what would be an acceptable answer, and hope that even in cases where they would be suspicious, they wouldn't, you know, speak up or say something. You know, it was, so it, you know, we were fortunate, as I sort of said, being in the eastern part of Poland. So one, we came under Nazi occupation almost 2 years later than had we been in the west. And being in the east, we were liberated almost a year earlier by the Red Army in July 1944, whereas the armistice finally didn't take place till May of 45. So 1952 we came to the United States, legally. The facetious answer he likes to give, he met me in a tree. The twins were born in New York City when Leon was a resident. And then the baby came in Syracuse.
Reformed Judaism. I was born in 1936, and by that time Hitler and anti-Semitism existed in Germany, and my father's part of his family sisters were in the United States and wanted him to come over here, but he finally had a girl because I have 2 older brothers, so he was delighted. And the feeling in those days was that this is just something in Germany, it's kind of temporary reaction to unemployment, and that it will go away. The labor camp wasn't really, I mean, was livable, let's put it this way. I was a child, but the children were kind of secretly even educated by some of the mothers. My mother was working, everybody, the adults were working. My mother was working in laundry. My father, as I said, was building the barracks. But in 1944, there was a Slovak uprising. The Slovaks were actually, up to that point, not German, but Slovaks were supervising or guarding the camp.